kerma.
Okay.
Or air kerma. Have any of you encountered this term in your readings?
Yeah, I've seen it in there.
In your essay, in your article, or in the book?
Oh, no, no.
Anybody else? It's a term that once in a while is thrown up there. It is not commonly used in diagnostic radiography. It used to be, and is the equivalent, and I just remember that because it is the equivalent of rentgen. And so if you see this term, look at it as rentgen. But really what it is when radiation first interacts with tissue, the first few layers, the very first layer, okay, which will be your epidermis, will receive the blunt of the radiation, right? So there is where air kerma or kerma is measured, that area there. And so it is, once again, it is the equivalent of rentgen, okay? It can be used with other types of radiation, commonly with beta particles, and then the kerma will change. Kerma will be, first is high, then it's lower, then it's high again, because as I told you before, with beta particles, when they first interact with the tissue, yeah, there is a deposit of energy, but then it begins to go down, and then towards the end, when it's losing almost all the energy, just bursts again. It goes up. All right, but in the case of gamma or X-rays, once you go past this layer, then the energy begins to decrease, and so here, when you think of kerma, it begins to decrease. If this is a graph, if I was representing that as a graph, and say this is time, and this is energy, what you will see with kerma is that it will go down as time progresses, or as tissue thickness. You can think of it as the time is progressive. After the interaction with the first tissue, it will go down. Okay, so if you see it, that's what it represents. So we think of it. You and I, we're going to think of air kerma as rentgen. Okay. Sometimes it's also thrown up there, especially in fluoroscopy. That makes sense? Everybody? Mm-hmm. All right. It's another term you're responsible for now.
Excuse me,
yes.
I saw is the air camera is the SI unit, right? Because the blue song say this explore called the Radt415. What is the SI unit?
International unit.
Yeah. And if I have it question in the exam, not that yeah, that is a board exam, and they ask about the SI and I use.
They are not going to ask you that. It's not going to be used first. If they do, come back to me and let me know that they will know, because it's not a term that is used in with actions.
Thank you.
That is something that I'm doing it. I was just talking about it because you will read about it. Okay. You will encounter it before the end of the program. You will read articles, or you will see it somewhere, and so be aware of it. Anything else? Maureen, what do you think? Well, any questions?
I'm sorry.
No?
No questions.
No questions. Okay. Sarah?
No, I knew you were going to ask me.
Yeah.
I'm not even awake yet. Maybe later. No.
So now that you're awake, any questions?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Okay.
Maybe later.
Family's good?
What's that?
Family's good?
Family's good.
All right, excellent. Anybody else? She's awake.
I couldn't hear it. Talk to me.
All right. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at items that are done to the equipment, to the environment, and when I say the environment in which we work, the environment in an X-ray room, the environment with the X-ray equipment. What is it that is done by the companies that manufacture this equipment? What is it done by the government to protect us and protect the public from excess radiation? Okay, and there are many features. You'll be surprised, the stuff that you might not. There's no reason up until now to think about why they are there. Okay. And so let's take a look at those in more detail. Okay. All right. And I don't know why this thing has shifted to the left, guys. And I don't know why it's shrinking. I'll call it T. So I don't know. What is it?
And it's also blinking on top.
Yeah, look at that. Something is going on with that thing. All right, so radiographic protection features. And once again, this is the stuff that it is done to build the X-ray room that is also incorporated into the equipment when it's manufactured. Okay, and so diagnostic type protective housing, and this is the first item that I talked about the other day. The housing of the X-ray tube, what envelopes, the envelope around the X-ray tube needs to contain the radiation, leakage radiation that is coming out of the X-ray tube. And if you're thinking, well, don't you have just a beam coming out? No, remember that X-rays are created isotropically. Isn't that right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it. What does isotropically mean?
In all directions even.
So it is going everywhere, right? And even though we focus it on one area, okay, and most of the X-rays are going to come because of the geometry of the X-ray tube, we want it to go in one direction. But you have X-rays going everywhere, okay? And so those of us and the patient need to be protected. And so the housing has to contain the radiation to maximum. And don't think that they have to be there. This is maximum, okay? 100 milliroentgen per hour, okay? To 1 milligrade, okay? 1 milligrade per hour. And this is it's a large quantity, 100 milliroentgen. Okay, when you think about it, it really is. But is it an hour? And we don't energize our X-ray tubes for an hour, okay? Our diagnostic X-ray tubes are 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds. That's typically our exposure time. And so it's going to require a lot of exposures to get to something like this. On the other hand, just from experience and from what I've seen in it, and from just equipment that I've seen and how equipment is tested, hardly ever you even come close to this. Manufacturers don't take a chance. I mean, they are not going to go cheap on this, because if they do that, then the FDA, remember the FDA is the entity in charge of X-ray equipment and the manufacturing licensing of X-ray equipment. Do you remember that? Okay, good. They are not going to allow them to sell their equipment in the U.S. This is the largest market in the world. They are not going to take a chance. And so equipment, they don't even come close to that.
How do they measure that? The leakage radiation?
You have an ion chamber.
Uh-huh.
You make several exposures, and you have an ion chamber right next to 1 meter. Okay, this is at 1 meter. Do I have that there?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, there's 1 meter. You measure at 1 meter. You have your ion chamber. Okay, very sensitive ion chamber, or a detector. It doesn't have to be an ion chamber, but a detector. And then you do several exposures and see how much radiation you get.
Okay, so you just test a couple
You
exposures
just test,
and then...
well, more than a couple. You do a whole bunch.
Oh, okay.
You do 10, 20 exposures to see if you're, and you check. Typically, you're going to go to the highest settings you have, highest MA and highest kVp. So you want to bring it to the top, okay? The maximum amount of X-rays that you can create, and with the maximum amount of energy, and then you test it. But from what I've seen, they don't even come close to that. Might come to 50 milligrams. Very, very low. Still, that doesn't mean, and I don't want to put that in your head, it is not safe for you to be making exposures and having your hand in the X-ray tube while you're making the exposure. Okay? It is not safe if you're doing a fluoroscopy exam, especially a C-arm. A lot of times, and you tell them, but if they don't listen, well, that's fine. They know it all, so that's fine with me. Especially in the operating room, you will notice that sometimes the orthopedic surgeons, especially when you're doing laterals or you're doing different things with the C-arm, a lot of times they will put their elbows and they will rest on the X-ray tube while the tube is being energized. You don't want to do that, okay? Because there is leakage radiation. It's not much, but there is leakage radiation, okay? Besides, you're not at 1 meter. You're right next to it. You're standing right next to it. You're resting on it. So, since they know it also, you tell them. They don't listen, that's fine. Control panel. Okay. Any questions about the housing, protection of the housing? No. Okay. The control panel. X-ray beam on must be positively and clearly indicated to the operator. What means is on your control panel, okay, when you make an exposure, when you turn on that switch, you need to know that an exposure was made. Typically, you're going to have a buzzer of some type, and you're going to have a light somewhere in the panel or somewhere indicating that X-ray was created. Okay? Outside the X-ray room, you should have, oh, and they changed that. I don't know why, but they changed it. It is not required anymore, but up to probably last year, it was required to have, see that X-ray light right outside the X-ray room? Mm-hmm. That light will come on when you're energizing the X-ray tube. So it comes on, and then it goes off. Now they're saying that it's not necessary. But more than that, your panel, you should have a light, and you should have some kind of bell, some kind of noise telling you the exposure was made. And the same thing with the portable X-rays. Same thing with C-arm, same thing with fluoro. You should have some type of indicator saying you are creating X-rays. A light, something you can see, something you can hear. Okay? And that is required by law. Okay? That's so you don't unexpectedly expose someone that you're not supposed to expose. Make sense? All right. Remember, all these are features to protect the public and to protect X-ray workers. Okay? Imagine if we didn't have that. It will be, you wouldn't know if you had made an exposure or not. Well, I don't know if I made it. Let's make another one. I don't know if I got it. Let's make another one. Yeah, so you can, that is not an excuse. You will have something telling you made an exposure. So, all right, source to image receptor distance. Okay, the SID indicator, that means either your measuring tape, as simple as a measuring tape, or it can be a laser, whatever it is that they are using to measure. The SID must be accurate to within 2% of the indicated SID. So if your SID is 40, that's what it should be. It shouldn't be 37. It should be 40 within 2% of it. Okay? So you have a few millimeters that you can have some kind of discrepancy, but it better be on. Okay? This is, many of this stuff is checked by the physicists once a year, and they will report on that. Okay? Anyway, so next. Hey, why do you think it's that important, by the way? Why do you think you want this to be accurate? Why is that important in radiation protection? Christina?
As for radiation protection,
Mm-hmm.
just the amount of dose they're receiving, I would say to keep more not for protection, but to keep the images constant. In terms of the size of
it's true, but
features.
also radiation protection. Very important. You don't want to be too close. You don't want to be closer than 30 inches to the patient. The intensity, remember, if you think of the inverse of square law, what happens? If you cut the distance, the more you cut it, you know, the increment of the exposure is going to go up exponentially. And so, never an exposure should be made closer than 30 inches. Okay, because it's the intensity of the radiation is going to be higher. Okay. Anyway, so that's why, because if it gets too close, you might end up overexposing the patient. All right, next, the collimation. Collimation, this is the X-ray beam and light beam must coincide within 2% of the SID. So at your SID, the SID that you're using, whatever, say you're doing a hand, right? You do it at what distance? 40. Okay, so you measure your 40 inches, 100 centimeters. Okay, it will be, it's a meter. Approximately 40 inches is a meter. Okay, and so you measure, okay, and you see your cone marks. And say, for example, if you have opened up your cone to an 8 by 10, okay, and you see your lights, okay, and then you make an exposure. That exposure should coincide with the light beam. Make sense? So you observe, right? And it can be done in many different ways. But the easiest and simplest way that a technologist what a technologist can do is open up your field, okay? Open up your field. I'll explain it with CR and DR. If you have CR, put your image receptor, open up your field, and put 4 or 5 pennies on the corners, okay? Indicating where the light field ends. Make the exposure, develop the CR, and see if it coincides. Okay, and then you know, measure. There is another way, and this is what we're going to be doing next semester in Radt415. We have a special plate. Did I pull it out the other day? Oh, I was doing some testing because our tube is off a little bit, and so I was doing some testing, and there is it's a plate. It's a copper plate, and it has a ruler. It's a ruler one way, a ruler this way, and so you expose that, and then you can see. So it's really easy doing it that way, and then you can measure how many millimeters. In any case, what you want is both of them. They need to coincide. When you do a full measurement, not only on one side, but when you do a full measurement, they should coincide within 2%. If they are off one way, or if they are off to the side, or they are off up or down, you do the full measurement, and they need to coincide within 2%. Now, there are times where all the maximum is 2%. You have it on one side, and it might be enough to make a report. As a physicist, you do a report, and then the engineers will come in and adjust it. Okay, but they need to coincide. Obviously, this is important because if they are not coinciding, that means that you possibly could cut off important anatomy. Make sense? Does that make sense, everybody? All right. The PVL. PVL, it was required, it was a device that was required between 1974 and 1994. And they decided that it was not necessary anymore. I don't know why they did that. I thought it was important. I thought it was something nice. The PVL must be accurately within 2% of the SID. What the PVL will do, it will, when you put your plate in your bucket, okay, once you put the plate, okay, it collimates to the size of the plate. Okay, all right, and it should work. And it was a good thing. I always thought it was something important because it collimated to at least the size of the cassette. You can make it smaller as a technologist. You should, if it's not necessary, you make it smaller, but it won't allow you to make it bigger. Okay, because a lot of times, especially with overweight patients, the stomach might be very close to the tube, and it looks very tiny. The light field looks small, but it's actually, in fact, open to a 14 by 17 width when you think of the divergence of the light. That makes sense? Okay. So that needs to also be accurate to 2%. Beam alignment. The tube and the image receptor, they need to be aligned. So there is another test that we'll do, I'll show it to you next semester, all right, where you measure and make sure that the alignment of the light, what is indicated as light, and the image receptor are in place. There is another testing that is not there, but write it down because it's important. It's called perpendicularity. And here, what you do is you measure, you compare, and see if the X-ray tube is actually perpendicular to the receptor. Sometimes, with use and age, the X-ray tube inside the housing is supported by these legs, these rubber legs. I mean, they put other things, but the main thing is a couple legs that they put on the corners. Two here, two here, two here, two here. And they support the X-ray tube. With age, because it's plastic, you know, they get hard, they get old, they get cracked, and a lot of times you begin to lose balance on the X-ray tube. Okay? The X-ray tube is perfect when it's new, but then you begin to lose that balance. And it begins to shoot X-rays in different directions. Or you as an X-ray tech, if you are too rough with the X-ray tube and bang the tube against a wall or against something, especially with X-ray tubes, that can also shift the X-ray tube. Okay, and then your beam is not perpendicular. Okay, and that creates problems because where you think the central ray is not. Okay, you see the light, you see the central ray, but then the actual beam is going to be off. So that's another test that you do along with the beam alignment. Make sense? Christine?
So for the positive polarization, it's not required anymore, but if they
No.
do have it, it's still tested.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's not required anymore for manufacturers to include it there, especially with DR. You know, you indicate the size that you want, and the field will open up to that size. See what I'm saying? Because you don't have plates anymore. So, filtration. Okay. Oops. Filtration is also very important, and if there is a feature, and listen what I'm going to say, if there is a feature that a manufacturer can do to protect patients and to protect you as an X-ray worker, is filtration. Filtration is probably, depending on the situation, but sometimes it's even more important than shielding. Okay. Filtration, the purpose, as we have looked at in this class, the purpose of filtration is to absorb low energy photons coming out of the X-ray tubes. These photons are not going to help in creating an image. Make sense? It just doesn't help in creating an image. And so all these photons are doing is exposing the tissues, exposing the skin, exposing maybe the first few layers of the skin, maybe going into maybe a centimeter of the skin gets exposed. Why do you want to expose a patient if it's not going to help in creating the image? And so filtration is important. Filtration is required in all X-ray equipment. And for X-ray equipment that is used at 70 kVp and higher, you need at least 2.5 millimeters aluminum equivalent. Okay? This is another feature where manufacturers don't take a chance. And when you measure filtration, you measure it. And how do you measure filtration, by the way? With the half value layer. Okay? And so when you do that test, which is another test that physicists will do once a year, they will you measure that. And what you find is that manufacturers, for always, I've never seen one that even comes close, they are going to have always more than 2.5. 2.9, 3, 3.2 is common to see. So it's just an extra feature. So the FDA they don't want it to come back and say, hey, you're too close to your maximum filtration. Don't sell your equipment here. They don't take chances like that. Okay, so filtration is something that is, for the most part, it's always there. It's always accurate. Okay, or more than what is required. Okay, reproducibility. Reproducibility is the variation in X-ray exposure should not exceed 5%. And what reproducibility is, or how it's tested, is you do a bunch of exposures. You pick a technical factor. Typically, this will be done at 80 kVp, 20 or 30 mass. Typically at 20 mass and 80 kVp, those are common technical factors where you use it, and you make a bunch of them. You make a bunch of exposures, blink, 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 4, 5, typically 6, 5 or 6. And then you have your ion chamber, you have your detector, and you measure. And the X-ray, the amount of X-rays that is created should be the same. If you're not changing your technical factors, that exposure should be the same over and over and over and over. Make sense? Okay? You don't want it to be, okay, you set your technical factors to be 20 mass and 80. You, as an X-ray tech, you expect that amount of X-rays, even though you don't know what amount it is, but you expect that to create an image, don't you? Because you already have in mind your density, your contrast, and the requirement for that patient. And so you expect certain results with your technical factor. What a physicist will do, they will bring, like I said before, they will bring in a detector, and you make several exposures, and then you make sure, okay, that the amount is in fact that amount. What you get for the first exposure, say you get, for the first exposure you get, I don't know, say 13 milliroentgen, okay? And the second exposure will be 30 milliroentgen. The third, the fourth, the fifth, they should all have the same. I mean, the variation cannot exceed 5%. Okay?
Is that what they check for with like QC? Or is that a little bit different?
Technologists typically won't do that,
Oh, okay.
but we need to know about it.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay.
that it is done, and it is done, once again, is to protect the patient, to make sure that what you expect as a technologist, that's really what you're getting. Okay? Does it make sense, everybody? Okay, linearity. Linearity, the maximum acceptable variation linearity is 10% from one MA station to the adjacent MA station. So the way linearity is tested is in the following way. In this case, you're going to change your technical factors. Okay, say you're going from 80 kVp, or let's start with 50 kVp. Let's start with 10 kVp, and you go to 20, and you go to 30, you go to 40. And the increment should be gradual in the same way, because when you're changing your mass, it is changing proportionally, right? And so the changes that you see in your detector should also be proportional. Make sense?
So changes in the
Say for example, here, it's a question. Let's say that you make an exposure at 70 kVp and 20 mass, and the result out of that technical factor, the amount of X-rays that you get with that technical factor, is 5 Roentgens. Okay, if I go up, if my original technique was 10, if I go up to 20, what do you expect?
Like it should be increasing it in like maybe twice the expo.
Yeah, so if I had 5 the first time,
Yeah,
I should get 10.
Okay.
I should get 10 then milliroentgen. Make sense?
Yeah, because you doubled the mass.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So that's
Increments,
what you measure. Okay, and you measure with different MA stations. You measure it with different times as well. And this is important because, and I have always said this: X-ray equipment, as sophisticated and as fancy as it might look, is not perfect, not nearly perfect. Okay, and especially when you get to your times, when your times are very short. We're gonna test it next year too. We'll do that test. When you measure, the time, exposure time, and you're getting very close to milliseconds, say 5 milliseconds, 1 millisecond, you might not get exactly what you want. And the same thing happens when you are very high, when your exposure is 3 minutes, or I'm sorry, 3 seconds of exposure, or you don't get what you want, and so you need to check that. Make sense? So linearity is important to check. So you do several exposures, 5, 6 exposures, where you do increments on your technical factor. It can be done with KVP as well, but it's typically done with mass, because there's where you have the problems with the MA stations and the time. When the times get too high or the time gets too low, you might not get accurately what you want. Okay, and that's why the discrepancy can be 10%. 10% can be a lot. Okay, 10% can make a difference. Especially if you change your technical factor a couple times. Are you following me with this? Yeah? Everybody? Yeah? Okay, let's see. Jesus? Make sense? Linearity? So far so good, everybody? Annie? Yeah?
Yeah, so it's higher than 10% is not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. Then you have to, if it's, what happens if it's not 10%? Well, the physicist will discover that, okay? And then he'll give a report to management, and they need to take care of it. They need to call the company, the manufacturer, they need to call the company. And in some cases, it is required to replace the X-ray tube. If they cannot fix it, if this cannot be fixed, a lot of times they can fix it, but many times they cannot, especially with older tubes, they just replace it. Okay. If it's not replaced, the physicist will come back, say, in a month and test it again. And if it's not wrenched, then we'll report back to the manager, and it's up to them to fix it. Otherwise, the report goes to the state, and the state will shut him down. What happens? Are we good, everybody?
And the adjacent MA station is double the exposure or
Double
half the exposure?
or half, either way.
Either
You
way.
can go either way.
Okay.
You can half it or you can double it, and what you see, the changes that you see in your mass in this case, you should also see it reflected on your detector. Make sense? Yeah. Everybody? Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and stand up for a second? Stand up. Look left. Look left. Look left. Look to your left. Oh, okay. Look at your neighbor. Okay. Look right. Okay. Look up. Stretch. Going back. Good. All right. Good. Now try to lean back if you don't have back problems. If you have back problems, don't do it. Sit down. All right. All right. Okay, the operator shield. The operator shield is the area outside the X-ray room where the panel is set, and you have a shield there where the X-ray technologist or whoever that is not the patient is behind that shield. Okay, and that's called the operator shield. That operator shield typically will be a primary barrier. It doesn't have to be. If you cannot turn the tube and face that way, they are not going to make it primary. But typically it's a primary, just to double protect the technologist, but it doesn't have to. The technologist has to be there, okay, behind the operator shield, okay? And as a requirement, write this down. It's coming up later, but I'll say it now. The exposure core, the exposure that you use, okay, your switch, right? You know what I'm talking about? Your switch, where you're gonna make the exposure. And the core should be short enough that you cannot, okay, you should not be able to go in the room and make an exposure. You should not be able to leave this operator shield. You should have to be behind that operator shield. Okay? Are you following me? see that cord that I'm talking about, okay? The gap where you cannot stretch it so you can go in the room and make an exposure. And and the purpose, I hope you can see it, the purpose is so it can stop you from making exposures and holding patients. Okay? They don't want you to do that. Okay? Because techs will do that. Okay? Even though we know that we shouldn't, the techs will do that. And it's to kind of force you to be behind the barrier. Okay? Is why they do it that way. If the cord, like I said, the cord should not be able, they don't give you a specific measurement because there are different shields and different settings where you have your panel. But the idea is that you cannot pull that cord, stretch that cord, and come in the room and make the exposure. Okay? Mobile X-ray imaging systems. And there's a whole variety of mobile X-ray imaging systems. The first thing that you should think when you're doing mobile X-ray imaging, either portable, just a regular portable X-ray machine, or with a C-arm, okay, with a fluoro C-arm, is that there are no permanent barriers. Okay? In any of those situations, you don't have a permanent barrier. And so you have to keep that in mind, that you have to maximize your distance to begin with. Okay? And second, you need to have your own shield. You need to bring your own protective shield because there are no permanent shielding. Okay? I said it before, but I'll say it again. The majority of the exposure received by X-ray technologists come from portables, and it comes from C-arm use. Okay? Especially fluoro in general, but C-arm especially because there are no permanent barriers there. Okay? And so that's the first thing you should think about. Mobile X-ray imaging systems do not have barriers. Okay, and so maximize your distance first and foremost, and then second, have a barrier, have a shield, bring your own shield. Okay. All right, now let's talk a little bit about fluoroscopy, because fluoroscopy is the area where technologists will get the most exposure, as I had said before, along with portables. The source to skin distance. Okay, now we're going to think of the patient. Okay, but remember, the more exposure the patient receives, the more exposure we receive. Because even though the beam, the X-ray tube is what is creating the X-rays, but once it hits the patient, then it gets scattered to us. Okay, the beam, the primary beam is in a straight line. No problem to us. We're not going to put our bodies in the primary beam. But it's when it hits the patient and all that is scattered that is being created, that is what will hit us. Okay? That's the problem. All right, and so keep that in mind, that the less exposure the patient gets, the less exposure we get. All right, now, the source to skin distance is very important. Okay, very important in fluoro. And just to give you an example of how it changes. The SID here, this is where the X-ray tube is found. See this little star there? This is saying this is the point source where we are. And this is at the source to skin distance. So they are measuring from here to tabletop. From here to here, the patient is getting approximately 72 milliroentgen. Approximately. This is just a number. Every X-ray tube will be a little different. But this is what we got. So from here to here, 40 inches. Yeah. All right? Okay. Now, if we cut that in half and we move the SSD, source to skin distance, that's what SSD stands for. You move it here, and now you only have 20 centimeters. The exposure, take a look, goes up to 128 millimeters. So it's a huge difference. And so distance, okay, the source to skin distance is very important. Remember, before I was saying it is not recommended, even with plain radiography. Even with plain radiography, it's not recommended to be any closer than 30 centimeters. Did I say that? Okay. With fluoroscopy, it's even more important. More important. Okay, you don't want to be too close. And so, yeah.
With most fluoro systems, can you adjust if it's 40 or 20, or is it just built into the table? It's one or the other.
You can with permanent with
Like
what
a
you
rated
do.
table. Yeah.
It's a stationary.
Okay.
One move. With C-arms, you
C-arm.
can't.
Yeah.
With C-arms, you can't.
Sure.
You can get very close. Okay. However, is it possible with permanent? Yes, it is possible, but typically you don't see that movement because you have that cover.
Right.
But the question is it possible to move it? Yeah. Typically they won't.
Okay.
Because the assembly of the fluoro is the X-ray tube is attached to the image intensifier. So when you see the doctor moving the image intensifier, the closer the image intensifier is to the patient, the farther the tube is. When they move the image intensifier high, the tube also moves.
Okay.
There are tubes though, I've seen it. There are tubes where they don't move. Okay. And so what is recommended is the source of skin distance must be no less than 38 centimeters on stationary fluoroscopy units. Okay, no less than that. Okay? Meaning you don't want to get to 37. You don't want to get to 36. No. Okay, and the manufacturers will make sure on the permit, because on the permit you cannot see. And so they make sure they have stoppers that won't allow the X-ray tube to get any closer. However, this is not surely even tell you. Yeah, I will. All right, so 38 centimeters. Okay, 38 centimeters is what you want. All right, on a stationary fluoroscope. Stationary means the ones you have in the fluoro rooms. Okay, and no less than 30 centimeters on mobile fluoroscopes on your C-arms. You don't want to get any closer than 30 centimeters. And I don't know if you have noticed, but X-ray tubes or C-arms, they should have a plastic cone at the end. Oh, you see where the X-ray tube is? You see a little cone? They should have a plastic cone. That plastic cone is there for a reason, guys. And that plastic cone is to prevent, X-ray techs from getting any closer, or the doctors getting any closer than 30 centimeters. However, doctors sometimes will request, and sometimes, and that is fine if the doctor requests, get that off, because the exam we're doing, yeah. X-ray techs do that too, and we're not allowed as X-ray techs to get that cone off. Okay, and I know many hospitals, they don't even know where the cone is. The cone is along with the TV somewhere, along with the monitor. That shouldn't be that. Just notice what happens, and you will. In your 2 years through the program, you will notice. Pay attention when the state is inspecting, or pay attention when the Joint Commission comes around. You will see all those cones reappear. They reappear because it's one of the comments that physicists will also do. When they do their annual check, they will look for that, and it's one of the observations that they will always make if they don't see a cone there. They should be there. If you're doing an exam, say for example a hip, and I'm an X-ray tech, and when you do a C-arm, it can be cumbersome when you have that thing on and you're doing a lateral, for example. You can end up hitting the table. You don't have enough space. I mean, the space in the operating room is small. A lot of times they don't even bring the table high enough, and then when you flip the C-arm to do the lateral, you hit with that cone. You can tell the doctor he cannot take the cone, but it has to be initiated by the doctor. You can initiate it, but the doctor has to say, yeah, get it off. Okay. A lot of times we don't text on ask, they just take it off because the doctors don't understand why that tube is there, that cone is there to begin with. But it is required, and it is required so it will not allow the doctor, the technologist to get any closer than 30 centimeters. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Everybody, questions? Rachel? No, it's not clear?
No, I don't have any questions.
Oh, you don't have any questions, okay, all right. All right, Ms. Valentino, are we good? Clear? Okay, good. All right, guys, this is stuff. Be patient with me with the exams and all of that, guys. I haven't forgotten. I have it there.